All right, so this is going to be the third lecture in this series. We're going to keep talking about animal intelligence and do a little recap on that and where animal intelligence comes from. And then we're just going to sort of transition into talking about how the perfect society is structured. And if you want to sort of skip past the recap part, you can just keep going until you see me starting to draw a giant map on the board. But for the recap and for a little more detail, we talked about how the peak level of animal intelligence comes from foraging. And that's because, you know, when you live in a vast landscape, you're going to have all sorts of different things you have to keep track of. Let's see, let's put a little forest over here. Some mountains and stuff, like rivers. So you're going to have an enormous landscape full of all sorts of stuff. You're going to have to know where to get stuff, when to get it, how to exploit it. You're going to have to know what like dangers exist out there, what not to exploit. You're going to have to know when you're like venturing into someone else's territory where there are like predators or something that could come after you. And so there's just like a lot to keep track of, but it's not just a static routine you have to remember. As vast as it is, there's also, put like a lake up here. There's also like a constant adaptation because things are always in flux and changing, so you have to be ready to like constantly adapt to new circumstances. And so you also have to be very inquisitive because new opportunities can arise. So you have to always be like testing things, checking them out, you know, trying to like take them apart and see what's going on and see if there's any sort of new opportunities in there for you to take advantage of. And so foraging, it's not just about memorizing a huge amount of detail, it's also about being constantly inquisitive and adaptive. And so this places you way above all of your hunter and grazer counterparts in the animal kingdom. And so that's the first level. The second level is when you get into competitive foraging. Sorry, I'm a little dyslexic. And this is AKA being a provider. So competitive foraging is when you start, when it's, you know, the non-childbearing member of the species, the males, starts figuring out that they can bring the females resources like food and gifts and things like that, and then the females can sort of entertain these competitors for a while until they finally pick one to let, you know, him get his genes into the future. And so that's called sexual selection. And so in the last discussion, I sort of conflated this level with pair bonding, but this technically isn't pair bonding yet. This is just competitive foraging through sexual selection. And the reason I sort of conflated this with pair bonding is because you don't really stay at this level. You just sort of, if you're in this level, you're basically either kind of dipping into it in an exploratory way and then bouncing out, or you're actually transitioning through this to get to pair bonding. But a species doesn't just sit here forever in this level. And so that's why I kind of mixed it with pair bonding. But once you get past competitive foraging, oh yeah, and this is also, this competes with, this is when the males start, the provider males start competing with alphas. Because usually in a species, in most species, you just have the alpha males like fighting each other to see who's the strongest. And then whoever wins gets to sire all the females for the next generation. And then like maybe a few other like sort of contenders to the alpha will sort of sneak in there. You'll have like the top alpha, and then like he'll father almost every child for the next generation, and then you'll have like a few of these guys will kind of like sneak in around the edges, you know, when he's not looking, but it'll be mostly the alpha. But when this starts happening, competitive foraging through sexual selection, the provider males start sneaking in there too. And so the provider males, they'll kind of start down here, like they'll be like nerds, like clever nerds, and they'll be the ones sort of like also sneaking in around the alpha and getting a little bit of genes into the future. And these provider males, the whole legacy, if you're interested in where this comes from, is in any given social strata, if you're not the top male, basically you don't breed. But as far as the females go, just about every female breeds, unless you just get like so sick and like messed up you can't even do that. But if you're a female on the lowest rung, this is like a really stressful place to exist, because everyone sadly bullies you and I guess takes out their stress on you and stuff, and then gives you a huge amount of stress, and then people don't support you. You don't have that support network, so that adds even more stress. So this is not a fun place to be, even if you are a female. And so you'll tend to have to need like some sort of extra talent that helps you hang in there. And one of those extra talents that can happen is just to be more intelligent. So in an alpha style species, you're not selecting for intelligence. This is not a recipe for cleverness and, you know, critical thinking and all that. This is a recipe for like strength, stamina, immune system, that like basic primitive stuff, but not like that next level of intellectual achievement. But in an alpha style species, if anyone is hanging on to new genes for intelligence, it'll be these ladies over here. And then at some point, one of these ladies, you know, just to keep the story simple, one of these ladies will give birth to a male who, yes, was fathered by an alpha, but ultimately ends up taking after her and being more of like a diminutive, sort of modest, intelligent male, basically like a nerd. And then this guy will try his hand at being a provider for the first time. And so this guy will be the son of many talented women, or as I like to say, the Kwisatz Haderach. And he'll realize one way or another that like he can bring gifts, like flowers and shiny stuff and like food to a female to try and impress her. And this is like a huge moment in an animal's progression when they realize this. Like when a male starts doing this. And so you could also think of this male as the Adam male, the first of a new kind. And you know, when he's successful, he'll get his genes into the future, because he'll start bringing her gifts, kind of like trying to sneak around the alpha. And he'll kind of be under the radar too, because the alpha will just like not see him as a threat. because of his diminutive nature. But then he'll get his genes into the future likely more than once. He'll be successful, and then that'll sort of like shudder off and on into the future until eventually it becomes more of a thing, and then you do have like a whole new tier of males competing with the alphas as like providers. And then eventually, if this keeps going, you'll eventually get into full-fledged pair bonding where the women will actually not just accept the gifts from a few male suitors trying to dazzle them, and then eventually kind of like quietly let one of them, her favorite, have a date night and win. It'll go beyond that, and it'll become full-on pair bonding where they'll actually stick together as a pair, and at least for one breeding season, and then eventually for much longer periods. And the reason pair bonding will launch you into the next phase of animal intelligence is because you start taking care of your children together, and you start, now you have two people working together to feed the children and also to mentor them, to train them, and to teach them about, like dad can teach them about how, like his tricks that he's learned for foraging. And so their success will be based on how good the parents are at feeding and mentoring them. So through the children, you then become selected for more intelligence. So I'll just call this nurturing and mentoring. So these are the three tiers of how in nature animals can become super intelligent. Foraging, competitive foraging, and then nurturing and mentoring. Let's see. And this is like crows and ravens and Kia birds from New Zealand, or Kia parrots rather. These guys are funny too because they live in an area where there's a lot of tourism for specific tourist attractions, and if you leave your backpack out, they'll just go and dismantle your backpack and take it all apart and take everything out of it and just analyze everything. And so they're just really clever, inquisitive animals, and we are one of them. And we became one of them through a special type of environment, because you can't live just anywhere and become this type of animal. You have to live in an environment that is accommodating to this type of adaptation and development. And for us, the environment that accommodates that is not most environments. In most environments for us, like inland environments, you're basically you have to be like a hunter, and you have to live in packs. Like if you're out on the savannah, like the grasslands, you basically have to live in packs. And this is what happened to the Neanderthal, and this is part of why they kind of phased out when we didn't, and we surpassed them, is because they became too much of a land pack animal, and so the males have to start going out. It's the key word here is of collectivization. They become very collectivized. I got some spears here. So the males will go out in hunting parties together. And so the success of the group is no longer about the individual provider. It then becomes about just the group itself, how successful they are together. So this is wolves and most hunting animals are like this. They, exist in packs. And, and so this doesn't lend itself to increased intelligence, because in this you start regressing back into like an alpha style setup where the most tough guy will sort of like become the dominant chieftain or whatever, and then you don't even get foraging really through the mothers either, because like they'll be out in these like dangerous grassland areas and stuff, and they'll just be like going around gathering. But because they are in these like really dangerous areas inland where like hunting is going on and stuff, they can't venture too far away from the village. Like they can't be going out by the tall grass or whatever, and they certainly can't be going off by themselves and just kind of doing their own thing like a true forager. They have to like they have to be very collectivized and sort of stick together. And so the typical land environment does not lend itself to foraging, and especially in the more primitive states, it doesn't even lend itself to pair bonding as much. Like you can become a pair bonder and then move out to these environments and then retain some of that pair bonding tradition that you develop somewhere else. But if you're like coming up in intelligence, or if you're presumably wanting to come up in intelligence in a place like this inland, you're not, you don't really, again, this lends itself to like alpha style hierarchies, not pair bonding hierarchies, because everything is so collectivized, But anyway, so we need instead to have an environment where we can go out and meander around and find like a huge variety of things to forage and, like safely, to where we're not getting like picked off by super predators that are out here on the savannah and stuff. So the place is, you would already know by now, the place where you would want to do that, we're going to change our reference now. And we're going to say that this is now the seaside, where you are able to go around and like find a bunch of opportunities for a hominin like us, is around the ocean, like a nice tropical area with reefs and stuff. You can go into the reefs and you can swim and snorkel around, and you're next to the jungle. And so like you still have all those opportunities out there in the jungle that you're already accustomed to, like fruits and nuts and all that. But now you have like the reefs and stuff, and all these like bi-shell varieties, like your clams and oysters and mussels and stuff, and all these like really powerful brain foods. And so this is where you can really start to get into foraging as a hominin like we are, that doesn't have any wings and stuff like all these birds. And it's interesting too, because the fact that we don't have wings limits us to where we can be a forager like this. But then what it also weirdly enables us to do is to get like physically more massive, because we don't have to worry about flying. And so the only reason, quite frankly, that we are adapted out ahead of these guys and even higher up in like general animal intelligence is literally because we don't have wings. So we're not like physically limited in that way like these guys are. But yeah, if ever these guys, and that's probably a lot to do with why ravens are so like physically massive. These are like really big birds, honestly. Not as big as an eagle or something, but these are some big old birds. And let's see here. So Oh, the exception to this, I don't think I mentioned it yet. The only exception to this progression here is if you are an animal that is literally swimming in brain food, like the orcas and the dolphins and stuff, because the ocean, it has all that, it's got a bunch of algae in it, and then that algae makes that DHA that, our brains are literally made out of. And then that gets in the food chain and goes up, and then they eat the stuff that eats that, so they end up, getting tons of, things like DHA and all these precious ocean minerals that are out here. And so these cetaceans like, orca and dolphins and whales and all these guys, they can, it's super easy for them to develop a massive brain. Also because, not just because they're swimming in brain food, but because they are swimming, because they're in an aquatic environment, so they can physically get much more massive. So they have two like enormous things going for them as far as just making it super, super easy for them to develop a big brain. So because it's just so ridiculously easy for them to build a big brain where they're at, they're not as subject to these steps that other animals are. But again, that's like the unique exception. But then we come along in our, Garden of Eden, if you will, on the beach, and we're kind of getting the best of both worlds, because we can still go around in our land environment, but then we can swim around in these reefs here and get all of this huge advantage of the marine environment. And we can also get like a little more physically heavy as an animal if we're spending most of our day kind of like in the water. And that's why part of why humans are a little more like sort of clunky, not that we can't be graceful, but we tend to be a little bit on the heavy side for an animal. And that's partly because we were in a place where for the most part we could get away with that. And speaking of clunkiness, I don't know, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but one of the many dead giveaways that, well, this is a big giveaway, I'll say, that we are not this like super land trekking animal. It's not just because like we don't have like a dog style or like a land animal style skeleton for our foot, where they have like this gigantic pad. Like our foot is just like our skeleton is just like that. Like we're almost like bone to ground nearly. But then like dogs and stuff and these land trekkers, like they have a gigantic cushion in here, and then they have like these really cool protective pads that they're born with. Like they don't have to like develop calluses, they're just automatically born with these awesome pads. And this is exactly how you would, like this is the easiest thing in the world to adapt, if you're like being adaptively changed and selected over time. Like this would be the first thing we would start to get if we were adapting to like a hardcore like savanna super trekker lifestyle. Like the fact that we don't have that is like one of the biggest, most obvious giveaways that we're not built for that really. That's just like a weird thing we can do on the side. But another one of the things too is, like I mentioned, it's our clunkiness. Like without going into detail, we have a lot of body parts on us that don't lend themselves to running. Let's see if I can do this here. It's like, let's make this a lady runner and a guy runner. Weirdly shaped bodies. Like there is special clothing we have to wear as hominins to enable us to run around or else it becomes a mechanical disaster. And that's another one of your big, obvious clues that we're not this super trekker animal, you know, as in like running and jogging forever. Like, and if you think you are this and you want to argue that point, then you need to demonstrate how you run ultra marathons in like super loose fitting clothing and you feel great about it. But like, you don't have to worry about that if you're spending your day in, you know, like most of it in a suspended environment, and you can be more like sizable and bulky. And it's, you know, it's not a big deal out here. But anyway, so that's basically the recap of animal intelligence. All right, so now I'm going to transition over into talking about the perfect society. And I realize I should probably record my drawing here so you know I'm not cheating. Got our Caspian over here. All right, so this is like, that's terrible. Okay, so like, this is like the Sinai area. Got Africa, Arabia over here. And let's see, got our Mediterranean waters over here. And like we talked about, the smart money places us geographically in this area here for like our Garden of Eden. Because, you know, like we said, the first Homo sapien Cro-Magnons basically show up here in this area, but also the rabbinical traditions, which are like a continuation of the original Bible and the Torah that started it all, they actually say in a sort of like mildly coded way that the Garden of Eden is in the same location as Exodus, which is like in this area. So like, there's a lot that suggests this is where it all started for our species. And also like modern understanding of DNA has shown us that all of our populations outside of this area tend to all have like extra added DNA in us that doesn't really make sense if we came from anywhere other than this and like radiated out. Because like if you're up here, you have extra DNA that like isn't really down here, and then if you're down here, you have extra DNA that isn't out here, and then if you have a DNA, if you're over here, you have DNA that isn't over here, and so it's like it really does seem like this isn't just the geographical center of the ancient world, but this is also like the you know, genetic center of our world as our species, whatever you want to call us, humans, Homo sapiens. So, and then this area here, I'm gonna like zoom in on it. So the Sinai area, if you will, a long time ago when there were a bunch of Cro-Magnons there, the climate was very, very different. You know, it was very lush and green, very verdant. Let's see if I can make this big. And then that like goes into the Red Sea there. All right, so so you've got like the Nile Delta over here. This is all like really green marshland over here. And this is Sinai. You got the Red Sea, Gulf of Suez, Gulf of Aqaba. And then you've got some like serious mountains too throughout this area. Those aren't good mountains. Let me redo these mountains. Make it look like mountains. And this isn't like an all-inclusive map, but this is a lot of what's going on. So you've got like some really hardcore mountains that are like pretty close to the ocean, even out here too. And back when this was like super green, this basically looked like Hawaii. You know, you have all this coastline all through here, and it just keeps going down, down, down. And you know, you got coastline over here, all this, got coastline over here. It might have been stuff going on up here. There's no reason why you wouldn't have had, you know, a lot going on over here. Could have different weather systems like rivers and things. But also, let's see, kind of off the map here, but this is like, that's like another Gulf over there. So like this area here is like Sumeria basically. And here's another Gulf that kind of like has been changing over time a little bit, but you've got these like two twin rivers, like the Tigris and the Euphrates, that come out over here. And as far as we know, this seems to be where the first human civilizations sprung up in this area. And this whole area is like considered the Fertile Crescent, where it's like, you know, more fertile, more green, more rain coming off, and you know, these sort of go up. But anyway, you know, back when you had Cro-Magnons here, this was like super lush and tropical, like Hawaii. But then over time, that would have changed, you know, the climate changed to where this became very desertified. And then you were left with just this Fertile Crescent area here. And then we see the first civilization popping up over here that we're aware of. This thing. And basically what happened was the people living in this area realized that they could like, they probably realized this a long time before that, but you know, there's like in these marshy areas, you have all these marsh grasses. And so they basically realized that they could like replant these seeds, and they could plant them in specific areas. They could carve up the ground and make like, you know, little irrigation channels, basically make their own man-made marshes. And so they could like create a bunch more of this marsh grass than there naturally was. And then through that, they can, you know, when it's got edible seeds, they can use that to like get a huge increase in calories. And they actually did that like in the middle here. And that's like the simple version. So, and then like later on in later generations, we start doing that in other places. But so this is like, conventionally speaking, this is like the dawn of civilization here, with us like controlling marsh grasses and, you know, turning it into things like we now call like wheat and barley. And then you have the dawn of civilization. And then, you know, it grew so fast with all these new calories that we sort of started to, it grew like faster than, you know, we were prepared for. You know, nothing in our past had prepared us for that. And so we started, you know, once your population explodes like that, it starts to become a challenge. Like, how do you know, like structure and organize your society so it's not just chaos? and things are organized, and there's some sort of like you know administration, you could say. And what we sort of did by default is we sort of backslid into a more of an alpha style of living, where we started getting like a strong man, like a Lugal king who would like just rule through force. And so it was literally like an alpha system all over again, just like the one guy who was the toughest, and then a bunch of his loyal thugs who were not quite bright enough to operate on their own, but they were still very strong and warrior-like and could follow his orders. And he was super strong and dangerous himself, but he was also very intelligent. So he was kind of this like mixture of intelligence and power. And then he gets a bunch of like guys around him following his lead. I'm just gonna draw this out here, even though it wasn't physically, geographically out here. I'm gonna draw a ridiculous king hat. And this sword there. And then he'll like have a bunch of like really tough enforcers basically working for him. And then these guys will like rule society, and this is like very primitive sort of thing to do. And so we started doing that about 10,000 years ago. And then what happened is, like, slowly over time we realized that this is not a great system, and that like one guy or just a few people are never really equipped to run an entire society. And then power always corrupts, and like these guys, like even if you get one guy who in the beginning is a decent dude, like this always devolves into nonsense. And then the power gets passed down through heredity, through his relatives, his children. And then that creates all these insane situations where you'll have like all these heirs fighting each other and killing each other, like, and even though they're siblings. All right, so this system, like I was saying, just generally is not great. And the reason it's not great is because it's like a backslide into the alpha style of living. And that's not what we're built for. We were built to become pair bonders, provider pair bonders. And then through increasing complexity, we started to specialize. And you'd have one family that was good at like keeping track of the books, and one family that was better at baking the bread. And let's see if I can draw some bread here. And then one family who was better at making the candles. And so we started to specialize as time went on, as we became more intelligent, and we sort of existed synergistically. And again, this is very antithetical to an alpha ruling over everybody. So when this civilization thing happened and then this happened, it kind of threw us for a loop. Like we weren't really ready for that. And but then what happened later was the Greeks, which are like off map, like up in this area, further over. They eventually realized, not just the Greeks, but they're like the famous example that gets taught to us in Western civilization. The Greeks realized this doesn't work so great, and so what they did is, instead of actually fixing this situation, they just took the power of the king and just split it up into a bunch of little pieces and made a bunch of little baby kings. So they were like, this obviously doesn't work. Having one guy who can just like force everyone to do stuff. So instead of having one guy who can force everyone to do stuff, let's have like a bunch of guys who can force everybody to do stuff. Like that was their solution. That's what they came up with. And then, and Rome did a similar thing. And then this is what gets taught to us, is like the best way to do things. Or as like, you know, the founding fathers of the United States, they actually had enough wisdom to know this was not ideal. And so they said, this just makes a more perfect union. They weren't like, yeah, this is the end all be all. They're like, yeah, it's better than what we've been doing. But yeah, that's what like the Greeks and the Romans did. They just split the power of a king up into pieces. And then, you know, like they would have like land-owning male citizens vote on which person they wanted to have as their little baby king for a while. And they gave them like term limits and stuff. But these guys still would have like ultimate power to just force you to do stuff. And we're not built for that. So let's get some, let's see. Where do I want to draw now? All right, so there's one civilization, and I'm not going to say who it is yet, but there's one civilization on the planet, on Earth, that figured out that this doesn't work, and that, you know, this is like the ring of power. You know, it's like Sauron. You might think you're going to fix the world with the ring of power, but really it's just going to corrupt you. And it doesn't matter if you try to divide it up and give those rings to like 9 men and 7 elves and 5 dwarfs or whatever. Like, it's still going to devolve. It's not going to work. You're just going to turn into ring wraiths. But they figured this out, and they were a massive civilization. They spanned fully 1/6 of the way across the hemisphere that they occupied. So they were a huge civilization. Like on this map, it would be beyond the size of this map, I believe. So they were a massive civilization, and you've never been taught about them, much less in like what they did. And they figured out how to properly organize civilization, and it didn't just work good, it worked beautifully. And it worked for thousands. I'm going to say this repeatedly just because it's so important. It worked for thousands and thousands of years. See, these systems, no matter if it's a king or a baby kings or whatever, they always go through these ridiculous cycles. And these are kind of considered the bane of our existence, where you'll have like, you've probably heard the phrase like, hard times make strong men. These are like hard times down here. And then, you know, then like strong men make good times, and then good times make weak men, and then weak men make more hard times, and then the cycle just keeps repeating. Because we like build up our civilization and it's flourishing, and then we get all decadent and spoiled and insane and greedy. And then you get all this like fraud, waste, and abuse in the system, and then everything just implodes and collapses. And then until we like finally stop acting like, I'm trying to think of a nice word, jokers again. And then we just like rebuild, but then it happens again. And so like, you know, philosophers all throughout history and great thinkers have lamented this cycle of civilization. And they're like, how do we get past this? But this is kind of like how those like monkey traps that weren't really traps, or it was just like a box with a little hole and like a banana or something inside. And the monkey would like reach into the box and grab the banana, but like when it had its fist closed, it couldn't get its hand back out. But all it had to do was like just let go of the banana. And it could get out. That's like what this is. It's like the banana box. And but one civilization fixed this. They figured out how to get around this. And so basically what they did, now I'm going to start explaining what they did. What they did was they weren't familiar with what we would call Tai Chi or the practice of Tai Chi or any of that. But they effectively did do those principles, and they used like Tai Chi on their entire world. And if you're not familiar, not that you need to know this, but with Tai Chi, I don't know, it's been kind of popularized, so maybe you do know it, but like with this form of martial arts, you basically try to work with the energies around you. You don't, is that even on screen? Me and my off screenage. Just can't stay on screen. Probably still off screen. Can't even tell. Okay. So with Tai Chi, it's often sometimes symbolized like the yin and the yang. And it's like you're working with the forces around you. You're not trying to just smash into stuff directly against it. You're just trying to like redirect the force and use it to your advantage. And this civilization that solved civilization, solved society, they did exactly that. They figured out how to work with the natural rhythms of absolutely everything. And so let's see, maybe I can, well, yeah, they didn't live in this place, but they lived in a place like this used to be when it was like green, like Hawaii. So let me just draw their civilization here, because where they live is sort of similar. And we'll just like pretend like it's back in time when this was like really green and beautiful. We'll just have like tons of forests everywhere, all kinds of greenery. This is just like all forests. So they live in they've been living for thousands of years in a really green and beautiful place with a lot of coastline. And I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but that's part of why they solved civilization, is because they have been getting almost 100% of their protein from the marine environment. So they are just like topped off with brain food. And that's part of why they like figured out civilization when no one else did. But what they did is they realized that, once you get rid of your kings, you basically have the question of, well, okay, how do we exist now? How do we have law and order and prosperity and all this stuff? And so what they did was they recognized that within a population, you're always going to have, like, since we are specialized, like I was talking about, we have the bookers and the bakers and the candlestick makers, the librarians, bread makers, candlestick makers. Since we are specialized in different ways, one of the many talents that some people can have is to just be good at like organizing and good at logistics and like planning and setting things up and making things happen. And I call these people like very catalytic people. They make things happen. And in conventional speak, they would be referred to as entrepreneurs. And so these are people that just have a natural talent for making stuff happen. And these entrepreneurs are just naturally responsible they're about 5% of the population, but they're responsible for about 90% of all production that gets made. So they're not making 90% of all products themselves with their own two hands, but they're causing it to happen. They're creating systems of organization and like putting things together and figuring things out and making all of this happen. So this is the, oh man, I'm gonna butcher this, the Pareto principle. And this is just a natural phenomenon where it's like 5% of people will be responsible for catalyzing about 90% of all production. And so these are the entrepreneurs or the catalytic people. And again, it's just one of the talents that can happen. I don't know if I can come up with some kind of icon for them, like the catalytic people. Let's do an A. Let's call these the A guys. That'll make sense in a while, why I would symbolize them with an A. So what this civilization did was they realized that all they had to do was just let these guys do their thing and like make stuff happen. And then let's actually draw these guys. Let's draw a few of these A guys, these catalytic people. Should probably put glasses on them because they're like they're like really like thoughtful people. That looks weird. That makes them look like aliens. Okay, no glasses. Change my mind. All right, so these are just going to be our catalytic people up here. So what this civilization realized is they can just let these guys do what they do. And by guys, of course, I mean guys and girls, like guys in the neutral sense of like people. So they just let them do what they do, but then they have this understanding, and this is the key to it all. You let them make lots of stuff, but then you just have an understanding that you, the population, let's draw population, the demos, lots of people. You just have the social contract or the common understanding that you expect of them that they will take care of the common needs of the society. Like these guys will take care of the roads, whatever else, the parks, recreational areas. They'll figure all that out amongst themselves. And to the extent that they do a good job at that, you will continue to partake of whatever they're making, whatever they're doing a good job making. Actually, these guys, it's the same people, now that I think about it. So they'll be like, one guy will be like really good at, like he'll have bookstores and it'll start as one bookstore, but he'll be so good at it that like before long he'll have like a few of them, and they'll be like something that the community really likes and enjoys. I think one guy that's just like really good at like baking and related topic and things like that. And then, so you'll just have this understanding as a society that you let these guys do what they naturally do, but then you expect of them that they will take care of the common needs, like like a social safety net for people who just whatever have like total bad luck, that, or like someone like a young person who grew up in a bad way and just through no fault of their own is kind of like disadvantaged, or just like all the stuff we associate with the general needs of society. You'll have like, let's see if I can draw a policeman. You'll have like police and firefighters. The terrible firefighter. You'll have like police and firefighters and all this stuff in society, and these guys will make sure this happens, and they will pay for it out of their own profits. So this is something that like we and most of the world are not used to. Like we're used to a completely different setup, but this civilization that exists, this civilization that beat that cycle of society, they didn't have this, ups and downs. They just figured out the right way to do it, and it just, like, they just stayed up. They just went up and stayed up for thousands of years. So like, not only is this system proven, it's actually the most proven of all systems. And it's weird that like no one has ever recognized this. You basically had to have like just the right background of eclectic knowledge to see this. But once you do see it, and once someone points it out to you, it's the most obvious thing in the world. But anyways, that's just a side note. Like, this works better than anything we've ever been taught or worked with. So these guys just went up and stayed up, and they partied too. I don't want to get too off on that, but like, they partied hard because they did solve civilization. So they would have these like county fairs all throughout the year, and they would just like go buck wild and like party like crazy because they were so prosperous. Because the reason that they're so prosperous is that when you have a system like this where you expect your entrepreneurs to handle all the common needs of society, they're spending their own money. Like, that's a big deal. I'm just gonna write that somewhere out there. They're spending their own money. So they're not spending your tax money. They're not coming in like a king and like forcing your money away from you and then spending it at like an insanely inefficient rate. They're spending their own money, and so out of their own profits. And so they're not messing around with like fraud, waste, and abuse. Like in systems we're used to, because of just like general inefficiencies, because like the people who spend our tax money in the systems we're used to, because it is not their money, they don't have the same level of incentive to spend it with as much like wisdom and efficiency. And also, they're not these people, the 5% of just like naturally talented logistic people. So they also lack these talents of spending the money like very cost effectively. And so they're the ones we're used to, they get like a 30-to-1 ratio as far as like for every like $30 of tax money, it's like $1 will go to the actual thing that the tax is supposed to be for. It's like, it'll be ratios that are just like horrendous like that. And again, you know, it's just natural inefficiency. It's they're not incentivized because it's not their money, so they don't have the same, you know, like emotion driving them. And then, you know, they're not the 5% that are just like naturally really good at that. And so they'll just have these like abysmal ratios of how inefficient they spend your tax money. And not only that, but that doesn't even account for like fraud, waste, and abuse. Like, once you start adding fraud, waste, and abuse into the picture, oh my goodness, it just like, it's terrible, man. Like the bang for our buck that we get for our tax money is just like, is nowhere, like we think it's normal because we're used to it, but in reality, it's nowhere near what it should be. But in this civilization, they got rid of that. They're like, just have these people do it, and we'll just have the understanding like that if any one of you doesn't do a good enough job in, you know, like caring for the common good, and you like do it repeatedly, and you're not like, you're irresponsive to, you know, citizens' concerns because we noticed, then we just stop giving you money. Like, this is perfectly ethical. It's like, if you don't reciprocate for us, then we don't give you money. We just withdraw from you. You know, like no one's forcing anyone to do anything. And so, and also these guys, they're not trying to cheap out, because you might think because they're spending their own money that they're trying to like, they might try to like skimp you on the goods, you know, but they don't, because precisely that reason, because if they don't do a good job with the common stuff, this system is very accountable, and this system keeps good records. It has a good memory, you know, especially if it's like organically filled with brain food. Just like the people have phenomenal memories. They can remember what you did like 30 years ago. You know, they can keep track of what you're doing. So like you're also expected to do a high quality job. So they handle the common goods the same exact way they handle their own little kind of specialty. They get the best bang for the buck, and they get the best possible quality. And the efficiency just explodes compared to what we're used to. And they don't even have to be like ultra efficient in what they're doing, because just like the general efficiency that they operate at is already like a quantum leap. It's light years beyond what we're used to in our systems. So they don't even have to like, you know, like scrimp and like, you know, get like super insanely fastidious about stuff. Like they just can operate like at their normal chill level and still like trounce anything we're used to as far as efficiency. And so because they are spending far less money on the common goods that we all need, that means a lot of that money just never is taken from you, or you know, never allocated from you for that purpose in that like terrible 30-to-1 ratio and stuff like that. So your wealth just skyrockets. And as soon as this system gets its pants on, like right out of the gate, you're already looking at a 4-to-1 increase in your expendable income, like how much, you know, fun money you have for just doing whatever you want. It goes up by a factor of 4 right out of the gate. As soon as this system gets the kinks ironed out and gets up and running, it just blam. Like, to make like a huge amount of math boiled down to something very, very simple, like once you transition from like a Greek baby king system to this type of system, bam, you're 4 times richer. And that doesn't even account for all the downstream effects that happen from this world, and like how, you know, your training goes up, your, you know, like the way people are taken care of goes up, so your stress levels go down, your performance goes up, and just like your efficiency, like everything just goes up and up and up and up. So becoming 4 times richer that's just for starters. You become 4 times richer. And there's so many points here, it's hard to keep track of everything, but these guys don't, they also, that might sound scary to some people, like, oh, you become 4 times richer, and it's just like this unbridled prosperity. You know, some people, they hear that and they think, oh, environmental destruction. But this civilization, not only did they not harm the environment, they actually invented sustainability. And they have not gotten credit for it, but this idea that's only just now becoming popular in our modern world, these guys have been doing this since literally the frickin' Neolithic. They invented sustainability because they just naturally, again, goes back to the Tai Chi style principles. They just understood that, you know, all wealth comes from the world, from people and from the world, and so you take care of all of it. That's like the simple version. And again, because they worked with natural rhythms, they didn't just try to like just destroy everything. And then like a lot of this stuff, this practice that kind of like spread around the world of like crops and stuff, people would go in and just like totally clear cut forests and just plant a bunch of crops and have like no sense of the local ecology and the local rhythms, anything like that. They would just like slash and burn and, you know, do that type of agriculture. But this civilization, what they did was they just figured out like the natural rhythms of every piece of the ecology, and they worked with it to enhance it and make it like produce, like do what it was already doing, but like turn the levels way up on like the like edible plants in the area and the levels way down on like the other plants, and just all this stuff to where they got like way more out of the natural environment. And they even, and this will probably give it away to some of the, maybe a few of the really clever nerds, but they even did this with kelp forests. They would manage the kelp forests too, to where it's basically like gardening. This is all like gardening here, as opposed to like slash and burn agriculture. They would like garden everything, and they would like manage the kelp forests, you know, kind of like keep away things, too many of the things that eat them, and give them optimal conditions so that the natural kelp forest would just like blossom and make a ton of food for them. And one of my favorite things they did was they had these like clam gardens. This isn't to scale, but like if we like zoomed way in on this, like, let me get like a sort of a scale representation. They had these clam gardens where they would have all sorts of like clams and stuff in these little tidal pools that they made. And so they would be, most of the time they would be protected from the predators that feed on them. But then, you know, once the tide rose, it would pour into it and like filter through and like bring a whole bunch of new food for the clams and stuff. So it would like cycle through and keep them fed and everything, but it would also keep them safe. And so they would, you know, it was literally like a clam garden. And so they would get like a ton of food through that. And they just did that with everything. They just figured out the natural rhythms of that area, and they just worked with it. You know, the natural rhythms of our gene code worked with it. The natural rhythms of nature worked with it. And that's what this system actually trains you to do. From childhood, it trains you to think like that. Like we get trained to think in a very different way, like just like force and hitting with a stick and like you do what I say kind of thing. But they got trained from a very young age to think in terms of like working with the natural patterns. And so, let's see. Also, this might seem kind of difficult. Like, how do you expect a baker to manage the police? But because no one's being taxed in this system. No one's being forced to do anything. No one's being taxed. But, so when these guys are not being taxed and like just saddled with all kinds of craziness, what happens is they become way more prosperous and way more free when they're just like, you know, or way more powerful, I should say, when they're just like free to be, you know? And so these guys will actually form coalitions. Like there'll be a good number of these guys, and they'll form coalitions amongst themselves, like amongst like-minded entrepreneurs, and that like can work together more easily and, you know, or philosophically closer, you could say. And through these coalitions, they handle all this sort of stuff, the common needs. And they can, because they're not paying like insane amounts of taxes, like in the worlds we're used to, these guys get taxed to oblivion. I mean, it's a freaking miracle that they can even exist. They're like, they get taxed so severely, like half the time, but it's a wonder they even like survive at all. Like especially like as you go down the food chain, because in the systems we're used to, like the top dogs, like the higher up, like the more powerful versions of these guys in the systems we're used to, they will actually like collaborate with, you know, like the administration, the kings, the baby kings that can use their stick force to just force you to do stuff. Let's draw some baby kings. This is the system we're used to. And the system we're used to, these guys, they don't want, that's another good point. They don't want to be this. because they're so good at this. It's kind of like that saying, those who can do not teach, or those who cannot do just teach, or whatever. It's kind of like that. It's like, and here I am teaching stuff. But no, I do lots of stuff. But they're really good at this. So they don't want to sit around all day doing this. But because this makes their life so difficult, they'll like sort of co-opt these guys, they'll like lobby these guys, they'll like schmooze them and all this stuff, you know? And you'll get these like really unhealthy relationships between these two entities. And a lot of people see that and they think that this is just pure evil. But what they don't understand is it's really what it is it's an unhealthy relationship. And it's because we're living unnaturally. Like, we're not designed for this. This is the old alpha thing that we transitioned out of, depending on, I don't want to say how long ago, because different schools of thought will feel different ways, but we transitioned out of this naturally a long, long time ago to become a more intelligent species. And so the fact that we're still using this now because of this, it's like, it's bizarre, you know, it's like a evolutionary mismatch, as they would call it. And so, let's see, it's hard to keep track of, there's like so many things going on. Oh yeah, this is, if you're curious about this, this isn't, sometimes people act like you're a conspiracy theorist when you say stuff like this, but this is just the way things are. This is just like, if you look up iron triangles, and that's what this is called, like, see if I can write it, like a political science textbook. Triangles. Iron triangles, that's what this is. This is just the way things are. That's not like theoretical or paranoid or whatever. It's just like a symptom of the unnatural set of conditions we've placed ourselves into because of like, you know, like Greeks and Romans. But anyway, so let's see. I'm gonna disconnect these arrows because we're gonna go back to the cool civilization that fixed this. It had none of this. Was having none of this business. No connections there. They threw their power of the kings into the fires of Mordor. They rid themselves. So let's see. So these guys form coalitions, and they'll like get really, they'll find like super talented people to work for them on an individual basis who are really good at handling this sort of stuff. Not making the rules, but just handling, like, you know, the basic logistics of this sort of stuff. So they'll just like delegate that task. You know, they'll be the head of like a larger operation, and they'll just like delegate that portion of it to some other guy, or, you know, a set of people, and they'll like, and then those people like work together in coalitions, and they'll handle this sort of stuff. And it might sound kind of complicated, but that's like an order of magnitude less complicated than how that stuff works now. I'm not going to get into how it works now, but how it works now is like an insane Byzantine mess. But like, this is even though that sounds like a tad convoluted, it's far less convoluted than how our systems work now. But they have that like latitude and that leeway and that freedom to you know, manage these public systems, because, you know, they're not being taxed into oblivion. They don't have like crazy like arbitrary rules being set on them by people who don't like really properly understand things, and just like this insane mismatch. Because in the worlds we're used to, like, these guys make up all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's just like off the wall, and it makes all these like artificial, unnatural, like messed up conditions for these guys, and makes life super hard. So that's why these guys would like naturally be incentivized to then want to get back into that and like influence that. It's just a bad relationship. But anyway, these guys cut that out. They're like, nope, we're not doing that. So how am I doing for time? We're not doing bad. All right. So, and again, so they figured out, to just go back to this point real quick, they figured out how to use our natural genetics for specialization, how like some people will naturally be better at this and better at this, and better at this, better at this, better at that. And they just allowed our natural abilities of specialization to work in their favor. Again, it's like the Tai Chi, but it's interesting because like this, we've been talking about Exodus and, the Hebrews and all of this tradition and like the Torah and stuff, but they actually have their own version of this, and they call it, let me make some room here. They call it shalom. And like, you might, if you've heard of that term, you might think of it as just like a greeting, like hello, goodbye, aloha or something. But that's actually the same basic principle as this. It means like the harmony of opposites, like how to create prosperity by getting disparate things to like work together in peace and harmony. And so that's what this is. This is Tai Chi, this is yin yang, this is shalom, this is all sorts of stuff. But and because we're not used to this, people will try to like poke holes in it too. They'll be like, well, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? Or what if this? But again, not only has this stood the test of time longer than far anything else, but this school of thought has been developed in our modern times. And for generations, people trying to poke holes in it have not been able to, because it's also an organic system. So as soon as you find something that you think is a problem, this system just figures out how to fix it and then fixes it. So let's see. I'm trying to think. There's like so many things to talk about. So these guys handle the common good. Accountability is a really big thing in this system. Like in like accountability and record keeping, so that like you can't just like, I'm trying to use nice words, you can't just like scam people over and then like disappear out the back and like slither away and then pop up somewhere else and start scamming people again. Like this system is big on accountability. So like, and reputation is the name of the game in this system. It's all about reputation and accountability. And that's precisely how we're built. What am I doing here? Accountability. Reputation and accountability. So, like we see a person's face and we remember them by their face, like it's a fingerprint, and then our brain just like hangs on to that forever. It's like how people say, I never forget a face. And part of why we do that, one of the reasons, is so we can keep track of people's reputations. And this used to be more common knowledge back in the day, but like they used to say, my rep matters, And so like, your rep does matter. Like it matters for so many reasons. And let's see, the police in this system are like cartoonishly Canadian caricatures. So like the police in this system just exist to ensure the public safety. They're not there to like lord over anybody. And they're accountable as well. So, and they're members of the community too. So they don't want a toxic community for themselves, and they are in no way incentivized to just mess around, and they're sort of buffered, so this isn't chaos. Like, they do have to like ensure public safety, but they're sort of buffered because like they're like paid for through these coalitions. And so like if you have an issue with one of these guys, you just go directly to them. Like, you put in a complaint or a bad review, or maybe just like a whatever neutral review, or you write to them or something, or they'll have like suggestion boxes where they definitely will listen to everything you say because they have to. And so you can just like communicate with them, more or less directly. But then if you have a complaint against one of these guys, like, yeah, there'll be a police office where you can file a complaint in that system. But also, if it's considerable enough and you don't feel like it's been handled properly here, you can go at that through this avenue too. You can let these guys know, like, hey, some shenanigans are going on over here. And then these guys don't mess around too. Like, if they see a considerable number of people, or even like, maybe not a considerable number, but like a considerable issue exists, and that you're willing to make a ruckus out of it, like, they don't mess around. Like, they will, like, if something got way out of hand, they would come around here and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, what are you guys doing? And everybody knows that accountability exists, that like you can, if you feel like you're not getting good treatment from these guys over here, which you wouldn't, but like theoretically if that happened, these guys know that you could come through them, and they know that they have to be absolutely accountable to you, especially since everything is recorded and on record, and there's transparency in this system. And they know that you can come through this avenue, so that's another reason why they just wouldn't even consider messing around for one instant. But yeah, these are like big discussions, and that's why I had to write a whole like fat section in a book just about this. But the incentives in this world are like perfectly balanced. Like, everything is connected up just right. It's not like this haywire thing over here. All right, let me grab a drink. All right, so I guess the next most natural question in this system is, how do the rules get made? Like, how do the standards of society get made? And the answer is, society would basically set the enforceable standards and like, regulations on, food safety and product safety and this and that. Those regulations and standards would mostly be set by what makes sense. But again, because this is like eternally accountable to the people, they don't mess around with setting these standards. And let me put a pin in that. One of the things people wonder about too is if there's no one in this system to just like force you to do stuff, then how do you have it to where you don't have like some of these guys go rogue and just create like a black market? Let's like change references and say these guys are like rogue ones, and they want to like create a black market. They don't want to participate in the system. They don't want to use part of their profits to like pay, put into the community funds pool to pay for stuff. And they think they're gonna like, because like any given community would just like have its own set level. Like, they would all agree somehow that, like, let's say 10% of their profits, for example, would be allocated towards the community funds pool to be spent at their discretion within the community funds pool on the public needs. And we'll just say 10%. And again, that might sound like a lot, but like, if you're not being taxed to oblivion, 10% is nothing. Like, you wouldn't even, it would barely be on the radar. Because a lot of our like products and stuff are like kind of like a spider web. It's like every product we purchase, like say this is the product you're purchasing in the middle, well, it has connections to like all kinds of other stuff. And like in the systems we're used to, like we get taxed in so many ways that the average person has no idea about. And just like fees and like all this stuff that has no natural need to exist, but it's part of the inefficiency of it all. That's not a very good spider web, but it's supposed to be a spider web. But we get taxed at like every single node and point, and then like we have all these like extra things that are piled on to like all of these expenditures. So by the time it gets from like the original source of things all the way to the final product, it's had like massive quantities of extra expense added into it. And then you, the final purchaser, have to pay for all of that. And in the systems we're used to, because it's so inefficient, like this is like a spider web that's just like covered in dewdrops. You know, if you've ever seen one of those spider webs, it just has like moisture all over it. And it's all like heavy and sagging. And it's like a wonder that it can even like withstand all of that weight on it. But the reason it can is because like the webbing is like so super strong and efficient. Well, the natural market, if you will, is so efficient. These guys are just naturally so efficient that this webbing is super strong. So that's the only reason it can handle all of this extra weight on it. But we at the end purchaser, we're paying for all of that. And that makes the price of things we pay for just go through the roof. Like we pay so much more than we really need to for stuff. And when you solve that problem and you get rid of like unnecessary extra weight and you get really efficient, or like naturally efficient, I should say, like you just, it's like you shake all that extra weight off of the web and then it gets super efficient again. And the price of everything just plummets. Like everything gets way cheaper. But since I don't want to like scramble your brain too much by trying to get you to imagine a world of like everything's cheaper, just imagine the prices stay the same as what you're used to, but then you just have 4 times much more money to spend on stuff. And so, let me get rid of our spider web here. But yeah, that's like another dimension of why you become so much more wealthy in this system. What was the point of that? Oh yeah, so these guys, these guys, if they're like contributing 10% each from their profits to the common good, if you will, in this system without all that extra weight, they don't even notice that 10%. That's like nothing. They're cruising along. You know, one of the analogies I use is it's like the systems we're used to, like it's like driving down the road in a car in winter with like your windows down and like with the parking brake turned on. So you're just like grinding against your parking brake and you have your heater cranked up to the max and you're trying to like stay warm in the cabin, but like, you know, it's not working because all your windows are down. And what they did was they were like, that's dumb. So they just like rolled up the windows and like popped the parking brake off. And they're like, woof. And they just like shot down the road, you know, and it's all nice and cozy in the cabin. And it's just because they got rid of like unnecessary inefficiencies. But anyway, so we're gonna ask this question. Okay, what happens if like some bad boys, they're like, we're gonna save, instead of contributing 10% to the common good over here, we're gonna pocket that, since there's no one above us to force us to do anything. There is someone below you to force you, but no one above you. But since there's no one above us to force us to do anything, let's just not make that contribution. Let's save that money, pass that along to the customer, and then, you know, we'll be able to undersell these guys, and we'll beat them by cheating like that. And so this is a natural question that arises when people first hear about this. They're like, well, what's to stop them from doing that, like a rogue breakaway black market? Well, the basic answer to that is people don't want terrible products. If someone can make a product really good, they don't want a bad reputation. They want the prestige of how good they are at making their products. They don't even want to be within a million miles of the smell of this. They want to be on the up and up if they can do something of quality. And let's see, and people want that quality product. You know, like back in the day, they had, you know, if you're old enough to remember, they had a thing called cassette tapes, and I think you would know about that anyway. And like with a cassette tape, you could actually record music. You could buy like a brand new album on a cassette and put it in your boombox and like record like a copy of it, and then you could pass that along, and then other people could make copies of that copy. And like they were like freaking out about this, and like they were saying it was going to be the end of the world, and it was going to destroy the music industry, and pirating was going to be the end of the world, and it would be an apocalypse, and we'd all be like fighting in the street over the last remaining cans of pickled pig's feet, and just all this insanity. And it was like none of that ever happened precisely because people don't want garbage products. They want that like nice new album smell. They want the album cover. They want the artwork. You know, they want that high quality sound. They don't want some cheap like third, fourth recording or some nonsense, you know. They want the prestige of the fancy products too, you know, like the new shoes, and I'm not going to say which brand, but they want the new shoes, you know. They don't want some cheap knockoff. And so people naturally want that higher quality product. And so they don't want the cheap, like black market version of stuff, you know, if they can avoid it. The only reason black markets even exist is because certain products get outlawed. And so the only way to sell that product is to be in the black market. But if people don't have to be in the black market, they won't. Like the talent will always gravitate over here. And even if there was like everyone was like, you pressed go on this system and everyone was like this, like everyone was like a cheater and a, you know, because they were just like used to the old system, and so they were like just used to being like con artists and like trying to cut corners and all this. And just one single guy or gal came along and was like, look, these guys are making these products over here. I'll make the same exact product that he's making. I'll make that too. We'll just call this guy the black market book guy. He's selling knockoff books. Another guy could come along and just be like, hey, I'll produce the same exact product as this guy, but I will also give 10% back to the community. And you know, it's chaos out there because no one's looking after the common good. Like, I'll start building roads and stuff with my profits. And as soon as people see that, he's just gonna have a flood into his operation. Like it's gonna be like a landslide, and people are gonna be like, oh wow, I can get the same thing, and this guy's gonna like help the community. Like, and then like he doesn't have that like shady vibe to him. Like, you know, he's not like dealing with a crack dealer or something. He's like, you know, this dude's like really on the up and up. Like, oh yeah. And this is what talented producers naturally want anyway. They want that prestige, not just of their product, but they want to like sponsor your kid's softball game or whatever. You know, they want their name up there, and they want to like be a part of the community. And so if even one single guy broke from this, the market would flood into that. Maybe not 100% of it, maybe not right away, but there would be like a landslide starting to happen. And then before long, these guys would be like, oh shoot, this guy's getting all the business, like I need to step my game up. And so they would like be forced to come over here, or just other talented people would see that example and they'd be like, oh yeah, that's awesome. And then they would do exactly what he's doing. And so in this system of like total freedom, if you will, not chaos freedom to just be insane, but just like freedom from being forced by kings to do stuff, it's a race to the top. That's a big principle in this system. It's a race to the top. I'll just write that over here. Race to the top. And so I didn't do the absolute best job of explaining that, but when you don't have any arbitrary authority lording over you, the community will naturally gravitate towards the most pro-social producers out there. It's simple, natural, and it obviously also worked like a charm for thousands of years, if it wasn't already obvious enough. So that's like the really crash course answer to why you don't have this like breakaway black market. And also these guys, were they to like break away on trying to sell products that are like perfectly legal, but just like trying to sell it for 10% less, they wouldn't be able to sell it for 10% less because they would lose the support of the rest of this system, like the utility providers. Like you would have, you know, like utility providers. Let's draw some electricity. Oh, that's not good electricity. Let's draw some Thor stuff. Some Zeus action over here. Why can I not draw an lightning bolt? Okay. I'm like bound and determined to get this lightning bolt correct. All right, so there's my lightning bolt. It's still not very good. So this will be like the guy, you know, one of the guys, one of the operations producing electricity for the community, like the utilities. He is the same, like he wants to be on the up and up. And so he and like whatever suppliers they need down in their supply chain over here aren't going to want to do business with these guys. And even if they did, it wouldn't be at like nice discounted rates. Like it would be at like worse rates. So they wouldn't be saving money at all. And that's if they could even associate with these guys at all. And you know, like if they tried to get like their own guy to do, you know, utilities, they'd be like, oh yeah, I got a crazy guy who will do utilities for us. Like he'll come and do some like rogue guerrilla utilities for us. You're not going to be recruiting like the best and the brightest for these tasks. And let me think. I'm like drawing a blank on why this doesn't work. Oh yeah, that's right. Just needed some tea. Because this area doesn't operate with the same accountability of this area, this black market, you know, they'll be like, oh, you don't need to know what I'm up to. Like, I'm just going to keep that to myself. And like, you know, they don't have the same like transparency, and they don't have like the same regulations either. You know, like these guys will have like food safety regulations and product safety regulations and all this stuff because they're operating on the up and up. These guys, you know, these breakaway dudes, they won't have that. So like maybe he can get like some rogue electricity for his operation, but it's not going to have the same quality, you know. It's going to like sketch out and he's going to have issues with it and it's just going to be a mess, you know. And so that's like a real general sort of like brief overview of why black markets do not thrive in a totally free world. and I might as well say it now. So like switching our reference again, if this is like the old system of baby kings that the Greco-Roman tradition conceived of, this is like the stick. And hopefully you've heard of the carrot and the stick. So two ways to get things done. You could do it with a carrot or with a stick. This is the stick, the beaten stick. This system over here is the carrot. Yeah, what's up, Jack? So there's the carrot and the stick. These guys try to force you to do stuff. These guys try to incentivize you to do stuff. All of them. It's like all mutualistic. Everyone's trying to incentivize one another and maintain a good reputation. All right, let's see. Let me get another example here, something that often comes up. So one of the big questions, again, is like, okay, so you might not have a black market operating, but what if you get like, I'll just do this over here for like my own sake. Like what if you get some guy who like comes in and buys like a big plot of land within the geographical boundaries of your community, and he does it in good faith. You know, he sees that there are like standards within the community, like a certain set of like rules and regulations or whatever that you guys have set for yourself to like serve the people. And he's like, yeah, he signs a contract, I'm good with that. But then like he starts doing like something completely different. He starts doing something like super unethical over here. And this is actually a huge, I don't know if I should have even broached this yet, but this can be a very involved discussion. But like let's say he sets up an operation. He's making a bunch of money over here. Sets up like a factory or something in a district where it's zoned for where he can actually make a factory, and that's okay for this plot of land he bought. So he's got a factory operation going over here, but you just have the understanding in your community that if you're a producer, then you're in the community, then you make your contribution and you participate. And let's see how do I want to, this actually gets a little complex. So there's different like scenarios, like, but like let's start with the simplest thing first. Let's say he's in the community, and let's say his market is outside the community. Like he markets to people like some other like town, like way far away, you know, completely different communities and different towns and stuff. And his market is like way out here. And he's like serving these people, even though he's within your community. And so you don't have that feedback loop anymore of like, if he's not doing a good job helping with the common needs, that you would just like essentially boycott him and, you know, like, which would bankrupt him. You don't have that feedback mechanism anymore because he's not getting his money from you in the community. He's getting his money from outside over here. So it begs the question of how do you handle like that kind of situation? Well, the really short and sweet version is that he would still be expected to make his 10% contribution from his profits, from his like industrial operation that he's licensed for over here. He would still make his 10% contribution. But what would happen is like, let me see if I can fit this in here. All right, this is supposed to be a pie, like pieces of the pie. All right, so let's say that each of these producers here, like this is the amount they contribute to the community funds pool. Like this guy contributes this much, this guy contributes this much, so on and so forth. Well, you would just take his 10% profit, he would submit, he would volunteer, no one can force him, but he would voluntarily submit his 10% profit, and then that would just be divided up proportionally amongst like each of these segments. And then like each of these producers would be responsible for spending their own portion of their contribution, plus like the little bit that comes from his contribution that gets divided up evenly amongst them in the community funds pool. And the long and short of it is, doing it like this keeps all the incentives perfect, you know? So these guys are still expected to perform, you know, they don't get to like abuse that system, you know? Like if they don't do a good enough job, then their profits shrink, so their piece of the pie shrinks, so their proportion of this shrinks. You know, everything is like connected, and because it is transparent, you know, like they do have to like spend things appropriately. They don't get to like try to like finagle some weird thing where they're like spending community funds or their portion of the community funds in concert with the rest of them, but spend it on like stuff that just like oddly benefits them more, but like on purpose to just try and like just help themselves, you know, because it is a transparent system, so everyone can see everything you're doing. So if you try to do any kind of shenanigans, like these other guys can see what you're doing, watchdog groups and journalists in here can see what you're doing. So like, you know, you're kept. It's not like a stressful thing, but you're just like, you know, it's like having a reputation. You know, you're just like, you just don't have the darkness to be up to no good. You know, like this operates mostly in the light of day, and you get your privacy, especially if you're a regular citizen. You get your privacy like maximum possible to whatever level you as a community are comfortable with. And the only time you even begin to like maybe start to lose a little bit of that personal privacy is when you do start acting like silly, and you know, like you get a repeated, like you keep getting traffic citations, like maybe you just keep driving really dangerously and putting other people's safety at risk. Well, you would get citations. You wouldn't get fines. Like it's not a force system to fine you, but those would go into like in a record, you know, just like it does now. It would be recorded that you were doing such and such activity at such and such time, and you wouldn't be fined or punished in that sense, but it would go in there. And then like other people, if it got bad enough and it like breached a threshold, then it could like trigger more transparency, and then like other people could see that, like people that would potentially want to lend you money, you know, for a mortgage or something. Not that you would need to do a mortgage. You could probably just, with how much bank you have, you could probably just like buy a house super quick. But if you wanted to like borrow money for some reason, like then the lenders could see that you were like, you know, being less responsible, more sketchy. Insurance companies could see that you were being more sketchy. Your employer could see that you were being more sketchy. And if you took things really far, you know, maybe all the producers, they've like established a standard for the community. Like everyone collectively established a standard to where if you maintain like a decent or like even a halfway decent citizen reputation, if you want to call it that, then you just get like community discounts. But like if you're just like acting way out of line, then they would like start to incrementally retract that, like what you might call like a good citizens discount, which is just their pro-social way of rewarding pro-social behavior. So if you're acting antisocial, they start to incrementally withdraw that benefit that they provide for pro-social behavior, you know? Like everything is connected. It's kind of like, you know, if your kid's playing hopscotch or something on the playground, and another kid comes up and he's acting ridiculous and trying to bully people, or he's not following the rules or something. Like you don't call in, you know, the you don't call in the like teacher to try and come like force him to follow the rules. You just say, we don't want to play ball with you, you know? Like, no thank you. We're not interested in having you in our game because you're acting crazy, you know? So that's not the best example, but that's sort of like the idea. It's like, it's just basic free association. But anyway, so if this guy moves in, buys a big piece of real estate, he's selling to an outside market, then if he wants to stay in good standing, then he just contributes his 10% to the community funds pool. And then that just gets split up amongst the portions that are already there and spent like that. And, you know, there's more that can be said, like what if he doesn't like the way it's being spent or whatever. But that's kind of like, one could argue maybe that's part of or maybe he could, well, no, because like he doesn't have that feedback loop. So if he's not doing a good job spending the money, there's no feedback loop to like, you know, at least through the market, there's no feedback loop to like, you know, disincentivize him from spending the money wrong. So that's just like a part and parcel to living within their community, but marketing to someone else outside of the community is that you like everyone else make your contribution, but you lose that ability to like decide how it gets spent. But if you're not up to no good, then you don't have anything to worry about because this system ensures that it will be spent very well for the good of everyone, including you, because you are now a member of the community. Let's see. So then the question arises, okay, well, what if this guy's like, nah, I don't want to. I'm not going to give you my 10% because there's no one to force me to do anything, so I'm just not going to give it to you. I'm just going to keep operating and doing what I do. Well, in this case, it's kind of like the citizen who's kind of acting ridiculous. Like they could just like incrementally, well, he's kind of doing the black market thing also by like breaking off like that. So they could like, you know, incrementally withdraw their association from him until the point where they just like cut off his utilities altogether if he just pushes things to like some bizarrely insane level. But, you know, if it goes to that level, but then he just starts, like, let's say there's like maybe like a really low income region over here, like a really poor region. And so he just kind of like somehow manages to like, I don't know, let's say his that's actually what I meant to do originally, is make his property like border the outside, just so I could set this up. Like let's say he just kind of has a little connection here in his property to this outside community. So he can, you know, let's say he just gets an arrangement to where he can get like utilities from this place over here. And although this community isn't thrilled with it, and they hear the concerns of these guys talking to them, like letting them know like, hey, this guy's up to no good, you know, like you shouldn't associate with him, and we're not gonna play ball with you as nicely if you're like helping this dude, you know. But like let's just say there's some extraneous circumstance and they're kind of like regretfully going along with this bad actor over here and like allowing him to ship in products and raw resources and stuff like that through their side. And so he's kind of like this like rogue like cancer cell inside of their community. So they can't even like vote amongst themselves to like deny him access to like roadways, like common roadways that everyone uses. And that would be like an insane circumstance, like for it to reach that level where like you've been just such a bad actor that they get to the point where they've cut off your electricity and stuff, and you still are just like operating and not like being a pro-social member of the community on like land that you originally agreed to be pro-social on when you purchased it, like in a really extreme, like unrealistic scenario that wouldn't even happen. But if it did, like they could just deny you access to like roadways and just common things. Like if this was a seaport here, they could say, nope, sorry, this is part of the community, you don't get access. And if he tried to like muscle his way around, well, that's why you get like local policing or sheriffs, or if this is a big enough region that's like aligned with other regions, like the United States, you know, it's like a bunch of sovereign regions that are just kind of like united together in a sort of like contractual or relationship. You might have like a defense force, or if, you know, this is a big enough region in itself, they might have their own defense force on top of like a domestic police. They might have like a something that can operate like a border defense or something, and they could use one of those entities or institutions to like say step in if he's trying to like muscle his way past their regulations. Because this isn't a pacifist society. That's an important point. That's what I was trying to get at, is like they do everything in their power to like be nice, be fun, like, you know, have a good time, like be of service to one another, you know, be moral. But if someone's acting silly to like an extreme degree, they're not just like what you might call like an old school hardline libertarian or something, to where they would just be like, oh, well, I guess you're free to do whatever. No, like if you took things to a crazy level, then they would escalate too, and they would like have their, you know, defense forces or whatever, their sheriff, like come and, you know, block you if you were just acting like super crazy, you know? And so, I'm trying to think what else. Especially too, like, not if you just like were not making your contribution to the common good, but like if you were doing something like hardcore immoral out here, like they found out you were like trying to like make your own Rocky Mountain hand warmers out here, and you realized you could pay like blind kids in wheelchairs like Billy and Forsey to make them for you in the factory, and you could just give them like fake money and they wouldn't know the difference. You're just doing something like really shady. It's the same thing. Like they could use the same sort of tactics to like ensure that like there isn't like legitimately immoral stuff going on out here that the community at large would universally agree was like not okay. And so again, I'm like just blasting through this stuff super fast, and I'm probably like forgetting some really critical details, but that becomes the next question in this flow, basically. It's kind of like accidentally working out in a nice flow, is how does this not become a tyranny? Because this is the ultimate power in this system, the people. Like this system literally is by the people and for the people. And, you know, some places they say that they're like that, and they're really not. They're just doing the baby king thing. But this system actually is the carrot system, the reputation carrot system, actually is by the people and for the people, like truly. So that's another thing, is people say, well, what if I'm in a community and it makes some whatever that I disagree with? And it's like, if the only way, if you could be in a community and like some new regulation gets created that you don't like, is because like the vast majority of people were behind it. That's the only way that could happen. So, and if that was the case, then there's all sorts of stuff you could do. You could try to bend people's ears and you know, campaign and educate people on your perspective or whatever. And there's all sorts of stuff you would be totally free to do to try and like get them to like maybe reconsider. But if it's still not working, then you might find another community a better fit. And what's cool about the civilization that figured this out is they would do a sort of like like a checkerboard arrangement almost. It wasn't like literally checkers like this, but it was sort of like an alternating adjacent situation with communities where like you would have different communities that would have like different temperaments and different proclivities and different preferences, different styles, different cultures. And so like if you were like, let's say you were born into this community and you're just like just not at all like happy with it, well, once you got to the right age, you would be perfectly at liberty to like go to like a number of other communities that did share your values, you know, and you would be sort of like adjacent to one another. So you could have more of like a custom tailored community for a particular type of people. And that way the community itself could be like an extension of your family. It could be people who are very much aligned and resonant with your values and share that with you. And so this checkerboard principle is a big deal, you know. And it's great too because once you're not like sitting on the lap of someone you disagree with, and you can like have your space, it makes it a lot easier to like collaborate from a distance. Kind of like the good fences make good neighbors. It makes it easier to respect one another when you're not breathing down each other's necks and like forced to do so. So it kind of like separates out a little bit to like customize your living experience. And again, like, because like it's not just the communities that are by the people and for the people, it's everything. It's the region, it's the state, it's the country, it's whatever. At every level, it's by the people and for the people. And it's all based around these communities, these sovereign communities. And the communities themselves are totally sovereign. Just like every individual within these communities is totally sovereign, and no one can force them to do anything. You know, as long as they're not like actively like putting other people's lives in danger or something. No one can force them to do anything. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah, the communities are perfectly at liberty to contract with one another and form like unions where they maintain their sovereignty and their independence, sort of like the United States, but they also collaborate. And so through that, like large areas that share like a language and a background and like a general culture can obviously unite into one broader entity without losing the independence and the sovereignty of each individual location within it. And it just makes for a more harmonious world when you arrange yourself like that. All right, we're back. I needed to get some room, and this will be my second try at this part because I messed something up when I was doing it. So, all right, the question I was answering is what the next big question in this whole carrot system of society is how do communities like make rules for themselves? And whenever the rule in question is not something obvious, like really obvious food standards or product safety standards or something, what happens is it just goes to the people to decide, you know, if it's something more arbitrary. And also, if there is like concern amongst the people, like say some new standard gets made, like these guys kind of like vote amongst themselves on a new standard for the industry, and then the people find out about it, and for whatever reason, like maybe there's some miscommunication or misunderstanding, and they decide they're not too thrilled with the new standard. What they can do obviously is they can voice their concerns, and then these guys obviously have to respond to them. But what's really beautiful about this system is these guys have to talk to them like actual people. these guys, the producers, they have to talk to the people like real people. They can't just like treat them like, you know, a bunch of mindless masses or something. Because again, the community revolves around the people, so they absolutely have to communicate with them to their satisfaction on a subject if there are concerns. And so you have this really like respectful relationship back and forth between these guys. And that's another thing with the systems we're used to, where all the incentives are really scrambled and misaligned. We're used to this thing where we just like threaten each other, and that's because we've been like conditioned to this like stick-based model of living. And so we're like, you do this or else, you do this or else, and like we're just used to like threatening and forcing each other and trying to like intimidate one another. But in a carrot-based system, it wires you differently. Like you just grow up differently and you think differently, your mind works differently. And so it's totally respectful and reciprocal. Like people talk to each other like politely. And like you know, like you tell them like pretty please with a cherry on top, and they're like, you know, thank you sir, may I have another, or, you know, like whatever, you know, like everything is very responsive. So if the community does have a concern about one of the like standards that these guys just kind of set on their own because they didn't want to bother the people with it, you know, they respect your time, they didn't want to like trouble you with like some crazy technical thing. But then there's, I don't know, some kind of misunderstanding, and then people find out and they're like, oh, I don't like that, or this is weird, or whatever, or they don't understand. Then these guys absolutely will come with as much information and whatever as you want to make you happy, to put your mind at ease. All right, so the next question in a society like this, actually, I don't like that river. That river doesn't make me feel good. I'm trying to draw like a natural river going through this area. So the next question is, what about like the more arbitrary rules based on like, you know, the culture that these people have or something like that? Like, let's just say that there's a question of like an overpass. Say normally these people live over here. A lot of them commute over here for work. And so there's like I don't know, there's like a bridge or something. And so they have to like drive down here around the mountains to like commute to work, a lot of them. And so like, and it's a lot of people, let's say. And so they have the idea like of making like a pass through this really beautiful scenic area. A lot of them like to like, go and do recreation and stuff, or like some of it's even set aside for wildlife or whatever to keep the ecosystem healthy. But they think to themselves, well, we could save like a huge amount of time if we had some sort of like bridge or something through here. And so this would be a good example of something a community would have to like talk about and you know, vote on. And so one of the questions is, how do you handle this? And the voting system in one of these type of communities, it can be however they want it to be, but I'm going to explain a voting system that would likely be used in most of these types of communities in order to basically make things the most harmonious. And I just call it the balanced voting method. And if you want to nerd out on it, it's a hybrid of these types of voting systems: the board account, the approval style, and the ranked tier voting. But the average person, you don't got to think about that. That's just if you want to dig into you want to check my math. But basically, what it is the balanced voting method is to like keep people happy. That's basically why it exists. And in these types of communities, that's the name of the game. Like, you could argue different types of voting systems are better for different types of applications and different types of cultures. But in a community like this, where it's all about keeping the people happy, then this is the best way to do that as far as like when you got to vote on stuff. So they want an overpass or something, and so like they might vote on whether or not the whole community even agrees that there should be an overpass. And like one of the options on the ballot might be no overpass at all. And then they could also have like a whole range of other possibilities. They could have like, one would be like, let's just put like a really inexpensive bridge through here like that. And then one of them might be like, no, let's do like a fancy bridge with like real beautiful like elvish architecture or something that like kind of goes with the flow of the mountains and the forests and stuff. Higher price tag, but it'll be really beautiful. And then there'll be like maybe some other architectural options or people could vote on. And then maybe one of them could be like a tunnel. People are just like, I know it's going to be really expensive, but I like the idea of just like tunneling under it so we don't even disrupt any of this. I don't know, there could be these different options, for example. And so the community would then vote on it, and let's see if there was any like extreme concerns while they were putting the choices together. Then like experts in these areas or even experts in other fields could chime in, just so you get the most educated and wise choices possible. And so you'd have a big discussion period and all that, but eventually it would come down to a vote. You'd finally get to the point where you'd want to vote. You'd have different options. And the way a balanced voting method works is you basically would rank which things you liked and how much you liked them. Like, let's say you liked tunnel the best, and you're like, I don't care, we're rich, we make tons of money compared to how we used to live. Like, I'm totally good with splurging on a tunnel or something. Like, that's your number one favorite choice, and you're like, but if for whatever reason I didn't get that option, then this would be my second favorite, like the elvish architecture. And let's see, and you could go down the line, and like, let's say you're a real hardliner and you're like, I like these two, but I don't want any of these other options. Like, I'm definitely in for these two, and like, I don't even want to risk taking sides between things I don't like go third, fourth, fifth, like that. I don't even want to risk that. Like, I want to be all in for the stuff I do like, or like I just plain don't like these other options. Like, I really don't like these other options. So instead of even ranking them, you just put like a 0, just a null right there on these other options. And so what happens when the talliers tally up the votes? What they'll do is they'll see that you put a 1 on this, and so they'll give the most number of points to this option. And then they'll see that you put a 2 on this, so they'll give the second most number of points to this option from you. And they'll see that you put zeros or nulls on these, and so they'll give no points at all to these other options. And then they'll do that for everyone, and they'll tally up all the points, and they should see like you'll have like a spectrum or whatever, and like maybe it'll have like different peaks or something, like a big strong peak there. Right? Let's say that the spectrum was kind of like close to what you voted for in this case, and so you could tell that like a lot of people were in for the elvish architecture, which was your second pick, and not quite as many people were in for the tunnel, which was your first pick. Let's see. Let's say like people just like absolutely did not like this other style here. Like, just total flat line almost. Like, almost no one allocated points for this option here. Just like a huge dip. So what this would tell the community about themselves is that in order to make themselves happy and to not like rub people wrong, they wouldn't want to go with this like the hard dip, because clearly that was something that a lot of people just really did not like. And this, and you know, different schools of thought will argue different merits of different voting systems, but this is important because you don't want like a sizable minority of people, or maybe it's not zero, but it's just like a hard dip. I don't know. Or like you also graph the zeros, like you have like a second graph to show like how many zeros people applied to things. And then there's just like a spike here. Like there's a hard spike of zeros on this option. You would want to avoid this because you could tell that like a sizable minority of people were not thrilled about this, because that's what the zero means. It's like, I'm totally against this. And so wherever you saw like a really significant, you know, or really notable spikes in zeros or like dips in the general vote, you would want to basically avoid that, because the whole point of your community in general, you know, is to, you know, have harmony within it. And you know, if this community had existed for a while, you know, it wasn't like in an initial stage where it was still kind of like sorting itself out and whatever, and maybe like arranging like a checkerboard district where there was still like a little bit of flow and movement going on, but that you had been past that phase and you really were like a more like cohesive community, that's when you would want to be very careful about, you know, like annoying too many people and just like, you know, upsetting too many people, you know, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the functional community. But anyways, if that's where your priorities were, this is what you could do, just using the balanced voting method. And then you could what another thing that's cool about this is it's not just like a really simplified like Greek style voting system where you only get one vote. You're just like, I want that, and that's it. This allows you to like, you can rank your choices, so you still get a say if your number one doesn't win. Like let's say this clearly didn't win because it wasn't the biggest spike, and you know, not enough fellow citizens shared your vision on this, even after all the discussions and the debates and everything. You're not completely left out, you know, just because, you know, this system basically doesn't have like a wasting your vote, because in some voting systems they'll say, oh, don't vote for the third party, you'll waste your vote, you know, because there'll be like two primary parties and then like a third party or something and a fourth, like usually like a third party that's more like interested in protecting the environment or something, and they'll be like, no, don't vote for them, you're gonna waste your vote. And so it like, you know, people are afraid to like really vote how they truly want to vote. All right, sorry about that. So in this system, there's no such thing as wasting your vote. You know, you could, if your first choice doesn't win, you still get to have a voice on everything else, and that's super cool, you know. So that's just one of the benefits of the balanced voting method. And then also it allows the tally to reflect the stuff that really rubs people wrong. And so in a cohesive world, you don't want to severely rub people wrong, or you want to like reconsider maybe with like which communities you're living in or something like that. But anyway, this gives you the resolution to actually see these things. So it's a real simple system, and I haven't seen anyone doing precisely this, but I've seen like individual versions of these, but never like a combination of them like this. But it's really simple, really straightforward, and you know, that's the balanced voting method. And again, I'm not doing this justice, but this is just like a real brief overview, and I think you could still sort of like internalize and intuit the point of all this just from this quick explanation. This looks like a freaking stick of dynamite. I don't know what's the difference between dynamite and a candle. I don't know. It should have some wax on it. Would that make a difference? The candle here? I don't know. Waxy dynamite. All right. So one of the other big questions that arises in this is, how do you have a court system? And like, how do you, when people do disagree on something in a cohesive community, like, how do you have dispute resolution, conflict resolution? And again, in a totally free world, in a carrot world, an incentive world, however you want to think of it, you're free to like use your own creativity to answer that question. But I'm going to talk about the two most amazing ways to do that. The first, that you could have like a 2-tier court system if you wanted. In the first tier, basically what it could be is, it could be, I'm going to go on a little story here. In ancient Rome, when it was still a republic, before it became an empire, what they had was they had an emergency response king system, where if, like some other country or tribe or something was attacking them, what they would do is their baby kings, their representatives and stuff, would have like an emergency vote, and they would pick one man to be king, even though it wasn't a kingship, it wasn't a monarchy. They would pick one man to be king while the emergency existed, and he would have total dictatorial control over the army and everything, but only to the end of that emergency, and then no more. And I'm not saying this is the smartest thing to do, but it's kind of an interesting thing to do, to have like an emergency response coordinator like that. Not that you necessarily have to give them absolute power, but that's not the worst idea in the world if you give him limited power. But anyway, so they would give him unlimited power while the emergency existed. And so what they would do is the leaders of their communities, their what I call their baby kings, representatives that the people would vote on to have power over them, they would pick one man from the community to be dictator and to hold the faeces, as they called it, for the emergency, for the duration. And because he was going to be so powerful, they had to choose very, very carefully who they gave all that power to. And so that's exactly what they would do. And so they would pick some like farmer guy, like if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, and if you haven't, you should be ashamed of yourself and you should go fix that right away. But in the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, his character is like this really wholesome, down-to-earth guy who just wants to be with his family on his farm in like paradise. He does not want to be out fighting wars and stuff, but he can. Like, he's this highly, highly capable general, like insanely good fighter. And so that's the kind of guy that they would look for. And that's part of kind of like what inspired that theme in that movie, is that real history. But that's the kind of guy they would look for, is someone like that who did not want the power and was just like a down-to-earth guy. Like, his whole community loved him. Like, he was like older, wiser, less insane. He had roots in the community. Like, it was in his interest to protect the community. Like, all this sort of stuff. And so that's the type of person that they would pick to be like full king, for a spell. And so that's an interesting example because we can learn from that, and you could employ that sort of caution in making one tier of your court system, and you could like have the people in best standing up here, the entrepreneurs or the catalytic people. I call them by a different name. That's why I hesitate, because I'm like trying to find a word that I could use right now. I'll just cut to the chase. Take you on another little side trail. These people are they're super they're very wealthy in the community because they're just so good at making stuff happen, but they're also the ultimate servants. Like in this world, the wealthy people are also the biggest servants. The biggest money is the biggest servant. Everything is perfectly balanced in this world. And so because they are the biggest servants, the more experienced ones with the best track record and with more wisdom of age and stuff, I refer to as the Alfreds, because that's why I recommended calling them the A's earlier. I call them the Alfreds because they're like your butler, taking care of you, Master Wayne. And if you don't know, that's a Batman reference. So the head of these worlds are Alfreds and Alfredas. It's in the civilization that spawned this idea. A lot of these people were matriarchs too. So Alfreds, Alfredas, whatever. It's all of them. Whoever's got that talent and skill naturally just rises into these positions. But anyway, the Alfreds, the biggest servants of the community, generally the most wealthy, but also the most in service of others. These guys, the older, wiser ones, are the ones you could entrust with having a similar type of vote like this if you wanted to do it that way. Oh yeah, and just because I find it interesting, this was once Alfred, and it meant, that name used to mean elf council, which meant that you were like a person who could commune with the elves of the wood and glean their wisdom and bring their wisdom to the people. So it meant elf council, Alfred. But anyways, I find that interesting that Alfred for Master Wayne has that name. But anyway, so you could, if you wanted, have it to where you could entrust your Alfreds, like people amongst these people who had risen to the rank of Alfred. And so this system, that's another thing, this system doesn't have kings, but the most prestigious rank in society you could achieve in that sort of sense of like a king is this. That's the real position of honor in this society. And so again, you could have the Alfreds, anyone who would earn that rank of Alfred, you could have them vote on a judges, one tier of your judges for your community. And so you could have them pick, use the balanced voting method if the community thought it was most appropriate. Use the balanced voting method to select people from the community, like Maximus from Gladiator, who were like the most salt of the earth, kind of, roots in the community type people to serve as like part-time top tier judges. And this could be like an appellate court, like a court of appeals, where you go if like the normal courts for whatever don't give you a satisfactory result and you want to appeal it, you would go up to like an appellate circuit. And again, if you wanted to do it this way, you could have the Alfreds use the balanced voting method to select really solid people to be like part-time appellate judges. These would be people that had like normal jobs and normal lives, but then like they could, if they were willing, they could accept the honor of being like a part-time appellate judge and like serving in that capacity for their community. That would be, you know, one thing you could do. So this would be like an appellate court. Oh man, I'm gonna butcher this. Is that right? Something like that. Jeez, I haven't actually seen that word written in a long time. I'm just remembering now how long it's been since my political science days. Okay, so this would be like the appellate court, the Court of Appeals. So let's see here. Okay, but your normal court would be a little different, or could be different. Or you could structure all of your courts like that if you wanted, if it made you feel all warm and fuzzy inside as a community. But what you could also do is you could just allow the organic system of the community to produce a court system, because all you need is people with excellent reputations. I don't know, the judges wear like a special hat. I'm trying to think if they wear like a special hat. So I can like designate them or whatever as judges. But let's say this is like, these are like your regular, everyday judges. All you need in reality to be a judge is to be, in this system, is to be a person with a good reputation who provides a sufficient amount of transparency to make the people happy, depending on how much transparency they want in their community. It would be different for everyone. So you'd just be a person with a good reputation. You'd be like, hey, look, I have a background in law, I have a good track record, I have a good resume. I'm perfectly willing to provide this like X amount of transparency so you can know that I'm not like paid off or corrupt or yada yada yada. Like I'm perfectly willing to provide that much, like allow you that much more of a view into my personal life, so you can see that I am in fact like just a solid, neutral person in the community. And so people could just organically do this to create a, you know, other tiers of courts, like primary tiers of courts. And in some places they already do this in like really specialized areas, like in the industry, where there just are no official courts that can even have the expertise to understand like the disputes that can happen in a particular like sector of, you know, specialty. They'll have organically occurring courts in those systems like this, and it'll just be like, it just needs to be something that both parties agree on is a viable judge. That's all you need to have a proper judge or jury, is just people who both parties agree on will be a very neutral judge. And so the entire court system, quite frankly, could just come organically through the community in this fashion. You might say like through the market if you want, but it's as simple as that, really. And again, you could have any degree of transparency you wanted. Like if for whatever reason, like the community just got a whiff of like maybe some lack of integrity in this system, they could just demand essentially that the new standard for being a judge was that you also submit X whatever to public scrutiny about yourself, and the judges who were fine with that would be the ones who would, you know, thrive in that system. And so you could have, basically what I'm saying is, in a community like this, you could have whatever degree of fairness and balance you want. You could push that envelope as far as you want. It's totally customized to what you want and what you need. So you can vote in a way that like keeps like the most people the most happy and tries not to upset any significant minority. You could have a court system which is, as ridiculously fair and balanced as you want to force it, and however much you want to turn up the volume on that, you can do it. And so, it's all up to you. And then if you want to, just to like sleep better at night, you can even have like a multi-tiered system with an appellate court that's like sort of appointed in this fashion, just to make you feel all warm and fuzzy, just to have that like extra layer of security if you want. And but anyways, those are some ideas. That's how new laws could be made. That's how the court system could work. And I know I haven't covered everything, but I think I've covered most of like the most critical stuff. Like if you have, like why you would not have a black market for anything legal, why you would not, oh, now I'm remembering. Yeah, there's like so much stuff I haven't talked about. This is a gargantuan topic. Like school systems would be similar to this too. I'm going to talk about school systems and homelessness, ironically. Not that they're related, but the school systems would be like this too, where you would not have these guys paying for the school system. That's not how that would work. The school system would be like this second tier of judges here, or this primary court system, this primary circuit of courts, you could say. The school system would be like that, where it would just be whoever is really good, people with just really good talents at, teaching, and, have really good training in like the really deep, psychology involved with like making like optimally engaging training courses that are really fun for kids and get them excited. Because that's another thing too, not to go on too many rabbit trails, but I started out in private school when I was younger, and it was so natural and fluid and easy that we didn't understand what the purpose of tests was. We were like, why are we taking this test thing on stuff we already understand? Because we would get taught in like this amazing way where, like, I don't even know all of the like genius that went into it, but we would get taught in this really amazing way where like all the concepts were like in one landscape together, and like one conceptual landscape that you could even visualize like this if you wanted. And it was all just like so natural and in your mind that like you knew that you knew everything. Like you didn't even question whether or not you knew everything. You just knew that you knew. It's kind of like they have these memory competitions where they, like contestants will compete to see who can remember like the longest string of numbers or something like that. And they have techniques that they use to where they can hold enormous amounts of information in their head. And there are all sorts of amazing things that we know about that we could use that we're not using in public schools to like really make learning awesome and fun and engaging. Like we have billions of people that are like scared of math when they should not be. Like if they were taught math properly, maths in math, they would absolutely love it, and they would see like how powerful they were with it. And, like it you could go on forever. But anyway, like we don't teach well, and that's because we have like little baby kings managing the teaching process, and they're just like they're just not equipped generally to do it. They're out of their depth. But if you leave it up to like an organic system, like an accountable organic system, like you will get, like no kidding, the most ridiculously awesome schooling you could imagine. I'm trying to draw like a little red schoolhouse. What do they have, like a little bell or something on top? What's like the classic schoolhouse? I don't know. Little schoolhouse. Schoolhouse from like a Bizarro World or something. But anyway, like that's my attempt at a schoolhouse. You would just have the organic community, just people naturally good at like entrepreneurs that would produce these school systems, and they would produce again like the most phenomenally high quality educations you could imagine, like where you'd have students like I was when I was younger, when I first started school, where like I didn't even know why we would take tests. I'm like, why are we wasting time on tests? Like we all know that we all know everything. Ask me anything, I'll tell you anything. Yeah, it was like that. And then I got transferred to public school, and I say it was like getting airdropped out of a cargo plane butt naked over the Arctic Ocean. It was that like brutal of a transition. Like I felt like I should be teaching the teachers in public school. It was so bizarre. But anyway, like that's the just universe, just completely, just the utter difference between like a high quality like private school education and like, what these folks tend to get set up for you, with like the incentives all misaligned, and then you've got a bunch of like fraud, waste, and abuse around the edges, and just like it's a mess. And this is a huge topic. I kind of go into it in more detail in the book where I talk about this, but like that's the basic idea. And you would have you could call it the free market, if you will. It would provide the best schooling for you, it would provide the best medical. What is like a classic archetype of a hospital look like? I don't know. I don't even know what that would look like. Whatever, let's just draw I don't know, a hospital. There's the big fancy entrance into the hospital. I don't know, these guys usually have something like this going on. Or wait, is it? Yeah, it's the Swiss thing, or the Hospitallers or whatever. Got your aid up here. But anyway, not that they would be built next to each other, but so your health care, your schooling, insurance for your whole life. Insurance is awesome. Like when it's not an issue for you and it's not like breaking the bank, like you realize how much you love it. Like, I mean, you can just get like so many random things insured, and it's just awesome to have that security. And if you're like way freaking richer, you can afford it. Like you don't even think about it. Like it doesn't even ever even enter into your consciousness that you're paying a little bit extra for like some insurance on something, because you're just like so like everything is so much more efficient and you're so much more prosperous and wealthy that like you don't even think about like the little bit you pay for insurance on this, that, and another thing, like health insurance and stuff. And that's how health insurance is. This is a gigantic topic, but like that's how health insurance is supposed to work. It's supposed to be insurance. You're not. We've done it all wrong. Like the systems we have now are kind of like date back to like when they had like a really weird thing, like mining companies that owned everything, and you just like you would work for the company store or whatever, or you would get like paid in money that you could only spend with the company. It was like just like these insane weird interactions, and then somewhere along the line they were like, hey, why don't we start providing health insurance to employees but through the company, and then like it just became a thing, and then other countries tried to get these guys to handle it, and like it's a friggin' mess. But if you let the most talented people at that particular thing naturally just do it, and you have that perfectly reciprocal relationship with them, they produce the absolute best you can get. Because when these guys really want something done super well, when like something just randomly puts a fire under their britches to get something done really well, they go to these people. They contract out to these people. But then there's a bunch of other corruption too, and that gets messed up. But like when they want something done really well, they go to these people anyway. So these are the people you want for to get the best of the best. You know, these are the people that make your smartphones and all your beautiful things that you love the most in the world. And again, it's very corrupted in the worlds that we live in because of unhealthy relationships. And there's a lot of stuff that you already can think of that rubs you wrong about what you're familiar with. But like, again, that's because we live in a very misaligned world as it is, that we inherited from the Greeks and the Romans. But anyway, that's my crazy, sloppy way of trying to explain that things like health insurance, general insurance, you know, whatever. Let's put a little building up here. Just like general insurance, schooling, all of this is the absolute highest quality in an accountable incentive system like this. And so, one of the big questions here, one of the reasons people would hear that and think, wait, hang on a minute. What if I can't afford it? You know, what if I have bad luck, something happens, whatever? You know, what if I'm a young person and through no fault of my own, like I just am not in a position where I can afford school or something? Well, that's why you have an assistant, you would have assistance programs for people like that. And what would happen is if you had like, I don't know, Johnny Be Good over here, and he didn't really have much going for him other than he could play the guitar like he was ringing a bell, but he couldn't really afford school that well. The assistance program would help him, but how it would help him, and again, with the efficiency of this system, these guys could afford that stuff like nothing. It wouldn't even enter into their realm of consciousness that they were like allocating funds for this purpose for people who needed help, like assistance programs for these things. But how it would work is Johnny would select which school he wanted, and there would be a whole bunch of schools, you know, they'd be like, one's closer to him, one's further away, ones that are more like this, ones that are more like that. And he would choose whatever school he wanted. It's up to him. And it's, oh yeah, that's another point. It's the competition, the free competition that you know, that like maxes out the quality and value of this system. It's just that open, free competition that does that, you know. It's anti-monopoly. Like, you cannot form a monopoly in this system. Maybe I should talk about that too, but like, this system does not allow for monopolies or like shared monopolies where it's like they pretend like it's competition up front, but really it's not. It's like a shared monopoly or a cartel. Like, this system cannot happen in this system. It's too accountable, too transparent. And if there was any shenanigans, if you even risked doing something like that, like a couple candle makers got together and they were like, hey, let's pretend like we're competing, but we're really not. And like, if people even got a whiff of that corruption and it came out and there was a scandal, it would mar your reputation, and then you would have to live with that, especially if you didn't have a good enough rebuttal in the court of public opinion, and you would have to live with that on your reputation. And so you wouldn't even want to risk like the appearance of like that type of corruption in this system. You would you would want to do everything like practically in your power, you know, not stressing yourself out, but just like everything in your practical power to like be on the up and up, you know. But anyway, this system would have totally fair, honest competition, and it's that competition that would drive the quality to the max of, you know, possible levels that science and reality and the laws of physics can allow. And of course, while maintaining sustainability and balance with nature and not doing anything suicidally crazy with nature and the natural resources and all that. But this will max out your quality, having competition. And so when Johnny needs assistance, what he does is he just chooses whatever school he wants. He shops around, chooses whatever school he wants, lets the assistance program know they pay for it with the school, they send the assistance check over. 'Cause this is like, I don't know, the assistance program. We'll just say. And they send the assistance check to the school he picked, but it doesn't say who it's for. They have no idea who it's for. And this can be set up, I might not be explaining all the details exactly right, but can be set up to where, like they have no idea who this money is for. And so, and they can set it up to where it works like that. So they don't know which students are using assistance. And so even if they were like silly enough to like consider like regarding a student differently because of how they were paying for it, they wouldn't even have that option anyway, because it just would not be, possible. So Johnny would pick his school, he would let the assistance program know, they would pay it, he would go to school, and because he gets to pick still, like he's not a subhuman just because he needs a little help, he just needs a little help. And so like he still gets to pick which school he wants. But because the people using the assistance get to pick, it keeps that superpower of competition going. So you still get assistance with the superpower of competition. You don't lose it by just like, well, let's just have, like the powers that be just have one block school for everybody and then they'll pay and then blah, blah, blah. No, like you have competition that gives you like extreme value, extreme, quality, affordability, light years beyond block school, one size fits all block school, and everyone still gets to go, no matter who they are, no matter what situation in life they're in. They just, go through the assistance program. And same with, healthcare and all this other stuff. And then, of course, the assistance program, make sure that the people applying for it are, they would just have basic checks to make sure, Johnny really was sincere in needing help. He wasn't like someone trying to run some little, corrupt thing or whatever. Not that schooling would be how you would do that, but, if there was maybe some other weird scheme someone might seek to set up or whatever, they would just have a way to ensure that you were on the up and up as far as your need for assistance. And then they would have other things like if you were of the age and you had enough of a background to start standing on your own 2 feet, then they would have like programs to help you if you needed it, like help you find gainful employment of some sort, and to help you be like have that pride of like being your own autonomous person and making your own bank, and because everything in this world is all connected. Your success is their success. Their success is your success. Their success is his success. His success is their success. Everyone is like very connected in this world. So like people like care just that much more about one another in this system, within a particular community. And let's see, I guess maybe the last thing I wanted to point out is like had something to do with homelessness. Oh yeah, that's right. If you're alive right now, a quarter of the way through the 21st century of the Gregorian calendar on planet Earth in the Milky Way galaxy, you know that like in the Western world especially, we have like a major problem with homelessness and like drug abuse and stuff. And this is an enormous topic, but this system would deal with that by preventing it in the first place. And once if you did slip through the cracks, sadly, it would have the most tip-top methods for helping you once that had happened. The way they would prevent that in the first place is it's weird that this even has to be said in the modern world, that like the vast majority of people don't even know this, but we are mammals and we are supposed to be protected unequivocally until we're about 2/3 of the way to puberty. And even then, we're still supposed to be mentored and helped, until we reach like adulthood while we're going through those challenges of life. That's what mammals do. That's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to be abandoned. We're not supposed to be left to cry. We're not supposed to breed like insects and just be bred and like thrown to the wind and all this insanity. We are mammals. I've said it multiple times, and it's like you can't stress it enough. We are not insects. When you neglect a youth, a child, a baby, a young person, whomever, when you neglect them, what happens is they don't get programmed with that natural sense of security that they're supposed to have. Can draw a swaddling baby here, little baby here, supposed to be protected by mom and dad. When this doesn't happen, you don't get programmed with the sense of just natural security that you do when you're protected properly as a mammal child. And so it leaves a hole in your programming, effectively. Like it leaves a hole in your soul where you just don't feel like your normal resting emotions are just like way down in the dumps. Like if a properly cared for child was like, I don't know if it was like a graph, this was 0. Like if a properly cared for person as a child was just kind of like coasted around here emotionally on a regular basis without any extraneous influences. Like if you're not cared for like you're supposed to, like you sit down here, like you're in pain, your life is pain. And so you try to fill that pain with, drugs and alcohol and food and whatever, various addictions. It can be shopping, it could be attention on social media, anything. I don't know if I want to get way into addiction, but just suffice it to say, I don't want to go off on a whole thing about and explain how addiction works, but like it's basically just you're just trying to like not feel terrible. That's basically what it is. Like you just try to like not feel terrible, because and societies have misunderstood this, and they've had like a war on drugs and stuff, which is one of the most insane phrases ever, like a war on drugs, because like you're fighting people who are desperate for pain relief. So there's no way to win that. They're not going to be like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just suffer, sure. No, they're suffering. They're trying to fix that. So they're just desperate for like a moment of pain relief. And a little phrase I've said is like, taking something at a party is an attempt to get high. Taking something every day is an attempt to block agony. And so the people who are addicted to things are like trying to fill holes during these formative stages, mainly, or like they were bullied or something because they were put in block school, and block school is like block school that these guys put together. This is like, God, I can't remember the statistic, but like this is like where like 85% of people who experience violence in their life experience it here during the time in their life when they should be the most protected. They'll be like subjected to like the lowest common denominator, like Johnny B. Good's parents, let's say they had their own problems in life and they were like really abusive, and then let's say Johnny turned out all right, but Gus, his brother, turned out to be like a crazy person, and Gus like wants to take his pain out on like other kids, and so Gus will do that in block school, and he'll just like have almost free reign to like say all kinds of like super hurtful things, do really terrible things. like this is just such a crazy like Lord of the Flies situation, And like this is so unnatural for us too. Like we're not built for block school, sorry. But you know, that's another way that people get like really like damaged in life, is like really hurtful stuff from like peers, you know, that just are terrible, you know, like, you know, when you see like a wonderful little kid, like, can you imagine, like, look at that wonderful little kid and then just imagine someone like hurting them really badly, you know, like that's freaking terrible. Like, why would we want that, you know? Like, that's so crazy. You know, like, I don't know how to explain that any better, but like, anyway, there's all manner of things that like put you down here, and then this creates this whole crazy cycle of like poverty and you know, addiction and abuse, and just like it keeps going forever. And so a society like this would understand these very simple principles about mammal psychology and biology, and they would just like not do that. They would protect, they would nurture, you know, and you know, they could have like, you know, various community outreach programs to like help struggling families prevent gusses. And if you did get a gus, you know, they would know exactly how to like restore him, you know. It's a very simple formula, honestly. I don't know that I want to get too into it, but whatever they were denied, they need that energy. And however much they were denied it, they need 10 times as much. It's a 1-to-10 ratio. So if he was denied like anyone to care that he existed, he needs people that are very concerned about his well-being, like for real concerned, like not like bureaucrats or something, but like a legit system that cares about him and stuff like that. And you know, people who've been like out on the streets for a while, living really badly, you know, there's like we can help those people like so simply. It is ridiculous how easy it is to like make a massive difference in their life. You know, like simple detoxing, you know, hyperbaric treatment is like a miracle at helping your brain literally rebuild. Like breath work and stuff is like, it kind of ties back into the fact that we are this like amphibious, like semi-aquatic marine mammal, that like the hyperbaric high pressure oxygen helps our brain like rebuild in our nervous system and stuff. And there's like so many like super cheap, amazing things that can like bring someone back to life. And you add into that like people working at those facilities, kind of like a Salvation Army type people, like really like people who like legit care. Yeah, you can bring people back to life phenomenally, help them become like very proud members of the community that can stand on their own, and you know, give them that like dignity of you know, self-reliance, you know. And you know, these communities can take care of themselves when there's nothing weird blocking them from doing so, and nothing weird blocking them from the most common sense being applied. So yeah, that's they can like just not have a problem with homelessness. And for like the very low number of people who could not be helped back on their feet, you know, they would just continue to help them out, you know, because there's like this, I don't know, I guess it's like a paranoia that in like a system that wasn't collectivized, that if you needed emergency hospital care, you would go to the ER and they would just turn you away. They'd be like, get out of here, you know, when you were like in the most need. But they don't do that. Like even in this jacked up system, they don't do that. Like that's insane. They don't turn away people. Like they help everybody. And so yeah, it's not in our nature to just like be all sadistic like that in the most critical times. But yeah, I was trying to go somewhere with that, but I kind of got sidetracked with my erasing. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I left out. But yeah, that's the the carrot system, oh yeah, that's what I, you know, there's so much detail, like I'm only like just touching on the main topics here, but I wanted to save the grand finale for the end, where I tell you which civilization was doing this, and the ones that were doing this for thousands of years and just like partying nonstop. And then like you know, another culture from very, very far away came and saw what they were doing and like started criticizing them for their love of like partying and stuff. They were like looking down on them, which is like a really sad phase of history. But they were like calling them like, I don't want to say what they were calling them, but the reason they were partying is because they solved society. And they did what we are built to do from the Garden of Eden and from, you know, our anthropological development. We are built to use our special talents to produce value and exchange that value, and to base everything on our reputation, and to just be cool because your reputation depends on it. That's like the super simple way to phrase it, but that's what we're built for. We are built to live in exactly this system. This isn't some like high-tech, you know, highfalutin, you know, fancy new algorithm or something. This is what's in your genes. You're specifically built to live in a reciprocal carrot reputation, truly free system, like we've been talking about. If you guess who this civilization is before I tell you, you get a nickel. The civilization who figured this out, I'm gonna try to mislead you over here. Let's see here. Okay, this is Alaska up here. Man. I fail. All right, we're gonna do Alaska here. All right, the civilization who solved society, if you're familiar with pop culture and Twilight, you might know as Team Jacob. It is this civilization over here, what are more commonly referred to as the Pacific Northwest. Indigenous Americans or Native Americans. They stretched all the way from Northern California to Oregon, Washington, Victoria, Alaska, over 2,000 miles. Like a serious civilization. And they were just all coastal people, just maxing out on brain food. These guys solved civilization. And yes, part of it was because of the natural geography. It like put them in a position where they were in like a environmental paradise, as far as like, I guess weirdos like me are concerned. Not everyone likes this environment, you know, they think it's too cloudy and depressing, but like freaking some of us are, maybe we're just mixed nuts, but some of us like absolutely love this environment. It's like the Hobbit Shire almost. But so yeah, their geography certainly influenced the way they lived, and they did this forever, and it worked beautifully. And these guys, there's a lot of like super cool artwork that came out of their world, and you've seen it, and you'll recognize it if you don't already know what it is. But like, that is the worst totem pole ever. But these guys invented like totem poles and stuff. And part of the reason they don't get talked about is because they didn't leave any big pyramids behind. But the reason they didn't leave any big pyramids behind is because all that pyramid wealth was going to the people and not into pointless pyramids. They didn't serve anyone except like one guy. Their Alfreds would put up totem poles, and this was them putting their reputation on the line. They were saying, this is us, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, and we'll put this on the line to do our best to serve the community. And I could talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about how cool they did, in here. And the only sort of difficulty they had was because they were, it is like basically impossible to try and like control your population in a humane way in a primitive setting without our modern accommodations. And so like naturally our age-old nemesis of overpopulation would spring up, and occasionally between regions there would be conflicts. But they, I go into it in the book where I talk about this, but they manage this as like ridiculously well as any ancient civilization could. Like the way they managed those conflicts was like gold standard level. Like by modern standards, we would look back and be like, oh, that was kind of wild, how they handled those situations. They would fight, but they and again, it's a big detailed conversation, but they handled it as amazingly well as you possibly could in that ancient situation. And these guys like invented thousands of new inventions. And these guys, since like the Neolithic, or I don't know exactly when, it might have been the Middle Ages or something, but for like many, many centuries, way before any other civilization, these guys already had intellectual property rights. Like if you invented a new invention, if you had a unique piece of art that you created, you got intellectual property rights on that in their civilization, when other cultures were still like, practically saying ooga booga and stuff. These guys were like living extremely well, extremely amazing lives. And yeah, I gotta cut myself off somewhere because I'll just like keep talking about them forever. But there's no one single name for all of them. They just get called like the Pacific Northwest people, or sorry, Pacific Northwest Indigenous Native Americans or whatever. But that's too much of a mouthful for me, so I coined the term. And if they don't like it, they can outvote this. The North American Upper Pacific Coast Civilization. North American Upper Pacific Coast Civilization. And then I just turned it into an acronym and stylized it with their phonetics. So I call them the Naupse. And hopefully that doesn't mean anything too bad in any of their many languages. But yeah, they were so about independence, even though they were one cultural and like macro ethnic group. They were like all separate people with separate languages, and like they were all about their sovereignty and their freedom and stuff like that. And so there's just like never been any single name to encapsulate all of them. Like I said, hopefully that doesn't, I'm not like an expert in all of their languages. I just always hope that didn't mean anything weird in any of their languages. Like how I called people from Turkey, the nation of Turkey, Hindalar, which means turkeys. But anyway, so yeah, that's, if any of my turkeys are listening. So yeah, that's the way to create a perfect society. And with the advent of modern accommodations, we can even get around like the tiny little things that they had issues with. and it just takes a little bit of thought on our part. And so, yeah, there you go. Live in Garden of Eden style. The other Team Jacob, we had one Team Jacob over here doing the Torah, 10 Commandments. We got our other Team Jacob over here perfecting society. And one of the reasons that I had eyes to recognize this when I saw it is because of a school of thought in Western civilization that very few people even know about, but which has been worked on by a disproportionately large number of people of Jewish ancestry. So I actually have like a disproportionately large number of people from that Team Jacob to thank for the fact that I was even educated well enough to recognize this when I saw it. So it's kind of cool. It's almost like a twin star system here between the Team Jacobs. But anyway, there you go. There is the crash course on how to create the perfect society.